Hello everyone, welcome back to another Grim Dawn skill guide, I guess I'll call it. This is how I approach masteries if I don't have a specific build I'm going for and I'm just playing through the game. I'm going backwards, I'm going from Oathkeeper back to Soldier because the dodge feature has changed how I play some of these. And as a result, I want to redo the soldiers, but of the soldier videos I've already done, but of course to do so right away would be fairly unexciting, so we're going to go backwards and we'll clean them up at the end. Alright, so we're going to be starting with the solo Oathkeeper here, and there are two primary ways of playing solo Oathkeeper. I almost always stick to shield and single-hand melee when solo Oathkeeper, just because there's so many benefits obviously, but you can do the fire physical or the Vitality Poison. I prefer Vitality Poison because both Vitality and Poison scale with Spirit, whereas physical damage scales with Cunning and fire damage scales with Spirit. So if you're trying to balance out your damage, which most people don't, if you're trying to balance out your damage, you need to split your points up, right? Generally speaking, when I am running the physical fire version, I'm focusing a little bit more on the Cunning. I'll explain why in a bit, but just keep that in mind, alright? So let's go through this. This is going to be a bit different because I'm actually going to be talking about the two different versions as I progress through the skills, okay? So, right off the top, regardless of which one I'm running Righteous Fervor, capping that, Aegis of Men here, capping that, and Safeguard. Safeguard because it gives you flat armor increases. It's giving you a percentage increase to all damage, so both versions are going to be able to use this, and the little bit of physical damage is going to be converted to vitality damage with Path of the Three. The physical is acid damage, excuse me. So this is going to get converted, but obviously it's slightly more damage on the physically minded Divine Mandate Oathkeeper. Again, physical damage here, not fire damage. Cunning is a little bit more important. Both of these do physical damage and fire damage, right? I'm almost always grabbing Presence of Virtue, but again, you'll notice internal trauma and bleeding damage, that scales with Cunning, so again, Cunning is a little bit more important to the fire physical, but even with the Vitality Acid, the energy regeneration and the increased offensive ability are extremely useful, alright? Absolutely huge. I get this on both. If we're running with the Vitality Poison, which is what I'm going to physically do here, right, this is where I'm going to keep the points because it's my preferred one of the two. I do use Streaks or Reproach, obviously. We also run Avenging Shield, of course. Now, Smite I run with the Fire Physical, obviously, but I prefer Smite over a couple of the other ones because of that bonus damage to Undead and Chthonics. It's really nice. What I actually do a lot of the times, I'll grab it here temporarily. We'll talk about what I do a lot of the times later on. But for now, on the fire, just keep in mind that at this point, I do put the points into Smite. Okay? Go up to stage 3, always get Resilience, just absolutely incredible. The increase to resistances, the maximum resistances is huge. Just absolutely phenomenal. Poison Vitality, of course, goes for Aegis of Thorns. That's what I'm going to visually represent. Whether or not I go with Fire's Might really depends. If I'm doing the physical fire, you'll also, by the way, notice that this is physical damage, but you can convert it to the fire. I don't recommend this. I'll come back to that. Fire's Might is something I primarily use for farming solo Oathkeepers, or farming Oathkeepers in general. For the Path of the Three one, I'll usually put a single point here. If I'm going to farm. If I'm not going to farm, I don't even put the 1 point in. But that's about it. Okay, I'll come back to this with the fire one, because I will obviously recap for the fire version. Go on ahead and grab Haven. I temporarily skip Ascension. I come back and get this later. This is extremely useful. I'll come back to that. We'll leave that one be. Grab Consecration, right? If I'm playing the fire one, whether or not I use Judgment is going to depend. We'll, again, come back to that. Hold off on that. But for the Vitality Poison, we don't grab that. I do usually grab Reprisal even on the Path version, even though that burn damage isn't really something we're doing a lot of. Because we have the 1/5 shot at getting this recover instantly, and we have reduced skill energy costs, so this is just absolutely phenomenal. Even though we're not doing that burn damage, we just love to see that, right? We go on ahead and grab Rebuke for the increased retaliation damage, which benefits our shield, of course. And then we grab, of course, the Guardian of Empyrean, because when we get up to here, we grab the Scion of Drieg, and then we come to here. We grab the lovely Celestial Presence, reducing enemies' resistances, doing passive acid damage to anyone around them. We grab our Path of the Three, and then, of course, we grab Ascension for that increased retaliation. We get increased all damage. We get damage absorption. We get the incredibly powerful reduced CC. We get life lead resistance. We get increased offensive ability. We love this. But now we have 7 skill points. What do I do on Path of the Three Oathkeepers with those last 7 skill points? Well, this really depends on what you're looking to do. If I'm playing with other people, I'll put 1 point in Vire's Might and pump the rest into Judgment to increase its target area as much as possible. The reason for this is because if I'm playing with other people and one of them gets into an ugly situation, I can use Vire's Might to zip over there really quick, and then I can use Judgment to taunt the enemies towards me and save them, okay? Furthermore, since I'm in the area, Presence of Virtue and all of its myriad bonuses here are going to help keep them alive as well. So if I'm playing with other people, that's how I distribute those last 7 points. These 6 points into Judgment are not for the damage. We don't care about the damage. We're doing it for the increased target area for more taunts. Okay, if I'm playing by myself, where I put these last few points is going to depend on what the character is doing. Alright, if I'm farming, we're going to assume farming here. We're going to be putting, again, the 1 point into Vire's Might here. But where the last 6 points go really depends on where I am. For example, let's say I'm going into the Necropolis, right? A lot of undead, a lot of chthonics. I'll put the last 6 points into Smite. Because even though I don't do physical and fire damage, right, even though I'm converting some of that, it's still not as damaging as some of my other things. It still is doing increased damage to undead and chthonics, which is going to kind of overcome that issue. If I'm not going to somewhere with a lot of undead or chthonics, I'm going to put the last few points into Retribution. Because even though, again, we're not doing that fire and internal trauma damage, we are getting some retaliation damage added to our attack, which, again, kind of compensates for that. And we're already there with Righteous Fervor anyways, so why not make that slightly stronger, right? That's usually how I run this, all right? If you're playing by yourself, there's not a huge need for Judgment because there's not a huge need to taunt enemies, right? Or even knock them down if you're running with the Path of the Three version because you've got all of these other effects, right? So what if I'm doing the Fire version, right? What if I'm running the Divine Mandate version, right? Obviously, we would still have the Guardian of Empyrean because Celestial Presence is still going to reduce those resistances, right? The only difference is we don't have Scion of Drieg, obviously. But now we change things a little bit here, because now what we prioritize here is going to be different. Now, when I run the Fire version, I don't normally run Clarity of Purpose unless I'm in Hardcore. I'll still run this for Hardcore with the Divine Mandate Oathkeeper, alright? Just as a aside, I'll still run this on Hardcore. The Path of the Three Oathkeeper, I generally run the same way regardless of what mode I'm playing, but for Divine Mandate, I don't run Clarity of Purpose unless I'm Hardcore. I'll still run Ascension, because I want that fire retaliation damage. It's really great, and I will max out Retribution as a result of that. It's just absolutely fantastic. It works really well with Ascension. It works really well with Rebuke. But again, where we're doing some of our last stuff is also going to depend a little bit, right? So, for solo Oathkeeper, again, I don't necessarily go with Vire's Might a lot of the time. Yes, we're adding some fire damage here, and Tectonic Shift has some bleed damage later on, and makes it a little bit of a faster recharge. But with Aegis of Men here, I generally don't have a huge need for that. But there is a slightly different method here as well. See, this assumes, actually, pull this point out of here. This is right now assuming that I'm not using this character for farming, okay? And you'll notice I have 10 points. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I usually get Smite early, but I don't necessarily have it later on. Because whether I have Smite or Shattering Smash is going to depend on where I'm at. Again, Necropolis or say the early stages of the game with a lot of undead, or if I'm going to an area with a lot of chthonics, I'm going to run Smite in very specific areas because Smite is just going to be doing a lot of work there, right? We can actually max this out just exactly, right? Get all that bonus damage. But if I'm not in an area with a lot of undead or chthonics, I'm running Shattering Smash because it does reduce the enemy's physical resistance, which is really great. And again, this is another great reason to focus a little bit more on cunning. With the physical fire, Oathkeeper, focus more on that physical. You get more out of it. Alright? This is... If you don't want to go through all of the hassle of changing your skill points like I do, this is something I do because I like to. But if you want to just stick with one skill, stick with Shattering Smash. Alright, the physical resistance is going to be useful everywhere you go. It doesn't matter what you're fighting. And again, you're already doing all that physical damage anyways. Again, I recommend you focus a little bit more on that physical damage because you are going to be reducing that physical resistance. This is really great, okay? So this is generally where you're going to go for Divine Mandate Oathkeeper, right? As a default. But what if we're farming? Now that's a different question. That is a completely different conversation. If we're farming, we play this a little differently. If we're farming, we are generally... No, we don't usually necessarily go for Ascension. If we're just farming, we are very specifically running Virus Might, Judgment, and Crushing Verdict. Although, you don't necessarily need this. Actually, I'll pull out those 12 points because what I do depends primarily on what equipment I have. We'll talk about that in a second. The reason why I pulled out Aegis of Menhir, why I don't use Aegis of Menhir on farming characters, is because if I'm going to be farming with a character, I'm going into the Shattered Realms. Right? And that's all about speed, getting through that as quickly as possible. And Aegis of Menhir, while it's very effective, doesn't get you to move. Virus Might does. Maxing this... Getting all the way to Tectonic Shift, maxing this, getting that 1.2 second skill charge reduction means you are going to be blasting fools less than 4 seconds every time. Boom, 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 boom. You're just basically chaining this, and you want Judgment for a sweet AoE, pull everyone in, blast them all with a lot of damage, and just absolutely decimate a whole bunch of people with huge damage right there. That you're knocking them down. You're not really having a problem. You know, your guardians, don't worry about them. If they get too far away, they teleport to you. It's fine. You need the resistance reduction anyways. The last 12 points I pulled out temporarily because where I put these really depends upon what I need. Alright? If your equipment that you currently have hits really hard, and you're not having any trouble doing damage, but you're having a little bit of trouble surviving, Ascension. Alright? You're in a pinch, Ascension does the job. You're having a hard time with, say, the bosses, or heroes, grab Ascension. If you're not having a hard time surviving, but you need to do a little bit more damage, you grab Crushing Verdict. If you're not having either of these problems, go on ahead and go back to Resilience because it's just generally speaking going to be a good thing. So which one of these three you grab is going to depend on what you need. And this is something that's going to possibly change as you adjust your equipment as well. It really depends on what you've grabbed. Again, this is the Improv skill distribution that I use. Alright, so what I need in the moment is going to change. Alright, so these last 12 points tend to float between one of these 3 skills, depending on my needs, depending primarily on my equipment. Okay, so that's how that runs. Okay, so that's how I run solo Oathkeeper if I don't have a specific build in mind. Okay, now this was a nice quick episode for a couple of reasons. One, Oathkeeper is pretty straightforward. If you're playing solo Oathkeeper, you're using a shield and a single hand weapon. Alright, just there's no reason not to with solo Oathkeeper. Second off, it was a really nice sort of reintroduction back into things now that I'm back on a more regular schedule. You know, ease our way into this nice, quick, brutal conversation about Oathkeeper. You'll notice I largely ignored Eye of Reckoning. This is because this is absolutely massive drain on your energy, and Soulfire is, generally speaking, going to be more effective with certain other masteries, because we really don't increase lightning damage. Yes, we do reduce enemy elemental resistance, so that lightning damage is punching through a little bit more. And if you're really fond of Spin to Win, Eye of Reckoning can be used, but I generally use Eye of Reckoning in combination with specific masteries. Alright, we'll talk about that in time, but for solo Oathkeeper, I just never use this. Okay, I have other things that I would prefer using with solo Oathkeeper than Eye of Reckoning. So for solo Oathkeeper, I just don't use it, right? But again, we'll talk about that in the future. With that being said, we're going to go on ahead and leave this sort of quick and dirty conversation here, because again, how we approach the devotions are more complicated on Oathkeeper, because what devotions you're going for changes very much with, very specifically, which damage type you're really focusing on. Alright, but we'll talk about that next episode again. But the devotions get interesting. But with that being said, thank you all very much for joining me. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.